I'm a boat builder from the Cotswolds in the UK, and I'm currently building a boat called Temptress, designed by Michelle Berrier and kitted by myself, to be built utilising the latest in CAD design, CNC cutting and modern epoxy wood construction. I have nearly finished all of the frames, and this is going to be the last video on building frames. I have been apologising, sorry it's been a lot of the same stuff, but you guys seem to enjoy watching the progress and seeing what I'm doing anyway. So, one more video on frames. I've just got frame 4 left to do, and that is the bulkhead that's next to me here. Quite a complex frame because we've got a bulkhead with an aperture in it. So we've got some veneering to do either side of that, and then we've got a laminated aperture that goes around the hole that's in the middle of the bulkhead. So if you've been following the series, you'll have seen lots of frame building before. If you're new to the series, then welcome along. And if you shoot back and watch some of the older videos, then you'll see how I build the frames within Temptress on a frame construction table. And we utilize CNC cut parts to slot together nice and easily with dowels that go through that construction board and give us a really good square frame. Post glue up, that frame then goes back onto the CNC machine, and I'm cutting the bevels and the notches into those frames utilizing a two-sided 3D carving operation. So that's going to give me some really great advancements when it comes to setting up, and we've already done a trial setup of the whole forward end of the boat, which went rather more successfully than I was expecting it to, so that was really good. So a quick recap, we did frame 1 first of all, started up with that. That was the first one that I did a test beveling on. I then worked through the boat pretty much sequentially, doing the big ring frames first of all that create the foredeck of the boat. Then we progressed through into some of the open frames which form the area of the boat where we're going to have a cockpit. And then we were back into closed frames around the engine hatch area and some of the frames right before the transom. We also have a big bulkhead frame that I did in the previous video where we did a big veneered sheet of plywood that formed the seat back for the aft end of the cockpit, and it also forms the main bulkhead between that and the engine as well. So frame 4 is the last one to finish up with and veneer and laminate this aperture around the inside, the same as what I did on frame 2 much earlier on in the series. So let's start off by getting some veneers cut, which we're going to book match and then glue down to the face of the plywood using West System epoxy and a vacuum bag clamping process. So we're starting out with a CNC cut bulkhead. So we've got gaboon plywood for the core of this bulkhead, and we're starting out with a 12mm bulkhead. I'm going to put a 3mm utility veneer on either face of this, so we end up at our finished 18mm desired size. As I mentioned, I'm book matching the veneers on this, so that involves resawing veneers and unfolding those so that the two mating faces are the ones that we see on the face of the bulkhead, and that gives us this mirrored effect of the grain matching on either side of the board. Really nice effect that gives us a nice repeating pattern from the center of the bulkhead working outwards. So each of the veneers get sawn to approximately their right length for the section of the bulkhead, and they then get edged with a hand plane just to make them mate nicely together with a really fine glue line as neatly fitting as possible. They then get taped together just to make this one big handy pack that I can pick up and make sure that none of these veneers are going to shift when we're in the gluing process. So in order to create those veneers, these boards get ripped into 120mm wide sections, and then they get resawn on the bandsaw. So we're starting with a 1-inch board, and I'm getting around about 5 veneers per board once they're resawn and then put through the sander to bring them down to size. So we cut them oversize on the bandsaw. They then go through the sander machine to take them down to their final 3mm dimension. And you can see that for this bulkhead, I've got some really nice, fine, straight grained utility veneers for the face of it. So it takes quite a while to lay out these veneers in total. Probably a couple of half days work really to get all these laid out nice and neatly and sawn to size, but worth it in the long run, I'm sure. So once they're all cut to size, I peel the tapes off the center join of the two parts, and then I just fold them out. So I've got two half bulkhead pieces, much more manageable to work with when I'm doing the gluing up process. And you can see that they just fold up nice and neatly. So I'll do that for both sides of the bulkhead because I'm veneering both parts of this bulkhead at the same time. Then we're on to glue up. So the vacuum bag comes back out again. This is the same bagging film that I used to create the envelope for the previous frame that I did. So I lay a portion of that down on the table first, then put the first side veneers face down onto that bag. All of the veneers then get wetted out with unthickened epoxy, just to let that soak into that wood grain and stop any potential glue starvation of the actual glued joint. We then apply a thickened epoxy, which is thickened with the West System wood flour and then coloured just slightly with a mahogany dust as well. The face of the bulkhead is then wetted out with unthickened epoxy and laid down against that, and then the second face of the bulkhead is wetted out with unthickened epoxy as well. That then gets another round of thickened epoxy applied to the second face, which is going to take the next set of veneers. And I'm putting this on with a West System notched spreader, just using the fine-toothed side of that spreader. You can see there that the second set of veneers are also wetted out on the mating faces before they're applied to the assembly. And that center line that I drew on when I started this process was just going to help me to align all of those veneers and make sure that they go back in the place that I originally set them out in when I did a dry fit. So you can see it's nice and easy to lay those down when they're all taped up together. So this is a sort of gummy double-sided tape that's going to seal this bag when I fold over the second side and create a nice sealed envelope around my part. So the bag then goes over the top and we can pull the paper off that tape and stick the two pieces together. Now this is an embossed vacuum bagging film, which means that there isn't a need for a separate breather film when using this bag. It allows the vacuum and the air to transition throughout the bag nice and evenly, and that's really nice because it's one less consumable in the whole process. And if you're doing wood veneer laminations, you can use this bag just straight onto them. And I've used this bag a couple of times now. This is actually getting a little bit leaky because there's a few holes appeared in it, hence the black dots around the place. But eventually got that to pull a nice true vacuum, and we got a good hold down on the entire bulkhead. So I'll leave that to run overnight, and then I'll come and revisit in the morning and we'll open the bag back up again. This time I decided to just cut the edges of the bag off because they've been used a couple of times, and as I say, it's getting a little bit leaky and full of holes. So I'll reuse that bag further down the line for a smaller vacuum bagging operation. Then the edges get trimmed with a flush trim router bit. So just a small bearing guided router bit that's going to follow on from that core CNC cut bulkhead that we've got in between the two veneers. There's a little bit of squeeze out of epoxy on this, so you do get the occasional bumpy edge to it, but for the most part, this is good for just trimming the veneers back to roughly where they need to be. Then I get the surface sanded nice and flat using a 40 grit belt on the belt sander. Start by sanding across the grain, which just flattens out any undulations between the veneers that there might be in place, and just takes that epoxy squeeze out that's been pulled up through the joints in between the boards by the vacuum. We'll finish that up with a sanding pass in the direction of the wood grain just to get rid of that cross grain scratching and give a better finish to the surface. This will get sanded again even finer before we get to the finishing operation on this frame. And then those couple of little knobbly bits that the trim router misses, where we've just got to squeeze out epoxy, just get cleaned up by hand. So there's the bulkhead for frame 4. Really nice looking bulkhead this, and you can see we've still got that book matched grain, so we've got this mirror image of the patination as we spread from the center of the bulkhead outwards. Really nice touch. Takes a lot of extra time to do that, but you know, this is worlds away from what a standard plywood sheet grain would be anyway. So I'll grab the camera and we'll take a look at some of the details in this. So you can see the makeup of the ply here. We've got the face veneer, approximately 3mm, probably just a touch less after I've sanded it, faired it flat. Then we've got our gaboon ply layers in the middle, so we've probably got about 7 layers within the gaboon ply, and then we've got our 3mm utility veneer on the face as well on this side. So you can see that makeup there in the cross section, and you can see the quality of the glue line that we've got on that. Due to the vacuum bagging process, there's no voids whatsoever anywhere around this. We've got a really nice tight glue up, which is exactly what we want. Nice flat component. And it's probably a little bit fussy, but you know, we've got these really nice little details. So you can just see this is the center line here. Center join, we've just got a mirrored knot either side. So everywhere that you look on the frame, a little knot on that side. We've got a little matching knot on that side. And the same all throughout the frame. Nice patination as well. So, looking really smart. Now, next thing to do is to get this aperture laminated around the inside of this, just to give a nice soft edge to this board, and to also just create a wider rounded area to that. Okay, so frame 2, if you remember it from a couple of episodes ago, is the baby sister of the one we've got to do now. So I've veneered this face here, and I've just got to do this lamination around here. Now, this bulkhead is slightly thinner. The one I'm doing at the moment's an 18mm. This is, I think it's a 12mm. So this timber is going to end up a little bit wider, because what I want is the difference between the face and the raised edge to be the same on this frame as it is on the one I'm just about to do. So I'm going to have to go with slightly wider veneers for there. So I'm just going to measure. I think I did about 3.5mm for the width per lamination, which you can just about see there. So we'll get something machined up to that, and then, yeah, I think I want to end up around about 7mm proud of the face with my my finished section. So bit of maths, 2 7s plus 18. We'll machine just over that, and then do the same. Last time, if you remember, I just used a trim router to round this, but then I also used a little base on my larger router just to cut this flush with the face. So I think I'll do that same again next time. Worked really well. So let's get some veneers machined. Right. We have a breakage. Now at 3mm, 3.5mm, something like that, we're kind of right at the edge of what I can get away with bending this in. It's quite nice that we're in an internal corner, which offers a lot of support for the for the veneer going around, but the issue is that these overhang sections that I've got to take the material that's then going to be laminated up behind them is of course unsupported, and that leads to a breakage, which is what we've got there. So I need to get my head around how I'm going to get this to work. I might have to go thinner for the face veneer that's on here. I can't remember if I did that last time, maybe I did. Yeah, perhaps I went with a thinner face veneer and then thicker backup veneers on there. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to chuck one of those through the sanding machine, take it down a bit thinner, see what we get. Right, take two. I'm going with about 1.9 millimeters this time. So that is already feeling a lot more comfortable into that bend. I'm actually able to just push that in by hand, which is quite nice. Yeah, that's gonna go lovely. I need to watch the old video back to try and work out what I did last time. I suspect I probably did something similar. So I'm gonna get a second one machined up at that, because that's gonna make that curve nicely, and we're not gonna do this all in one swoop. We're gonna have to do this in two halves. So we want two of those. Okay, so that was the trial assembly, and seemed to go pretty well actually. What I'm basically doing is I'm using these two spreader clamps in the middle here just to lightly pin this in place with a small amount of pressure. I'm using this one to put a huge amount of pressure, as tight as I can get it on this clamp, right down here, and then by tapping the block on the top end of the veneer up here, I'm pushing this around and basically expanding it and forcing it back out into these internal corners. Which means that I don't have to have loads of clamps all around these internals and try and push it in. I'm basically spreading that out into that section. That seemed to work pretty well. And the key really is having this clamp here really tight, because otherwise this is just going to slip straight round and then it's going to go in that direction. But we want this to stay put and the rest of it to expand. So I'm going to try and do this with 5-minute epoxy. I want to try and get this moving on fairly quickly and actually glue in the surrounding pieces as well today. Might be asking for trouble, but I'm going to try and get that done. So I'm going to glue up the inside of this, and I'm just going to do this one half, hopefully let that set with 5-minute epoxy. Then I can do the other side, and then we can do the surrounding bits. That's the plan. So let's give it a go, see what happens. Okay, so extra little addition. What I've done is I just put a stop block here, and that's going to give me a positive start for my veneer, but it's also going to take the stress off of that clamp that I had done up really tight. So what I should be able to do is just drop my veneer in up against that, and then push it up against that block. Anything to take the stress down considerably, because when we're working with 5-minute epoxy, everything happens a little bit quickly. So that's going to work really well. I'll get that masked up because I don't want to be gluing that in place, and I'll get some epoxy mixed up, and I'll try and get this first veneer in. So I'm going to use the West System G5 for this. 5-minute epoxy, equal measures of resin and hardener, which is just done visually because we normally only use this on quite small quantities. So we'll pull off the caps and we'll measure some out by just basically matching their visual puddle sizes in the cup. So I'm just going to make that cup a bit smaller. Okay, so I've shot those into either side of the cup, as you can see, just to give myself maximum working time from the minute I start mixing them up. So we'll mix them for 1 to 2 minutes and then we'll get it on. Okay, I want to really get this out of the cup as quickly as I can, because the warmer this epoxy gets, the quicker it's going to set. So I want to get it out of this concentrated area where it's going to start to build up heat. We'll get it spread out on the surface, and that's going to buy me a little bit of extra time. Medium levels of stress, I would say. There's just about enough time to get that in, but having the clamps preset and this block here really helped me to get that in. I'm just cleaning that up with the chisel tipped mixing stick, and I managed to clean up one side, but the second side is now set. So yeah, just about enough time. We could probably do with a 10-minute epoxy, that would be quite nice, but that's pretty good. I'll leave that a little bit longer to set up, and I should be able to declamp and then do the second side. So that does allow me to get things moving on pretty quickly. And I'll just really, this is just tacking this in place, to be honest, and then this will also be glued when I do the timbers either side as well. So it's okay, successful. Okay, so similar process as the first time round, but this time I've got side one to create my stop block at the bottom. So I've butted straight up into that, right in the middle of the bulkhead. And then I've brought this around, I've got this clamp, and I've tapped the top in to push it out into those corners again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just cut this center joint here, because I really want to get this one glued up at the same time. I'm going to cut that probably 2 or 3 mil over length, and if you remember I did this with the previous bulkhead, and then I'm going to bend this down here and tuck it up into there, and then use that final bit of force just to really push that out into the corners. So we'll get that trimmed down to length. Okay, that works nicely. You can see that I can actually pin that in place pretty much without any clamps at all. And we've got just a little bit of spring pressure in there just to apply that final bit of push into those corners. So when we do put some clamps along the top and bottom, it should all work out nicely. So we'll get the second batch of 5 minute glued up and run the gauntlet again. Okay, so there's the first dry fit. This is probably still right on the limit of bending these, even though they're shorter sections, but managed to get them round okay, which is good. Nice tight lamination for the first half. So what I've done is I've staggered the 3 layers here, so that when I do the second side I can knit into those nice and easily. And I've marked the top ends, so I'll do the same thing there, trim them down to size, and then we can get that glued up. So the surrounding area gets masked up just to try and limit the mess. This is going to be a very messy operation with epoxy as I glue this up, and hopefully just limit the spread of that into the face veneers. We've got plenty of room there for sanding out any marks still, so that's okay. But yeah, anything I can do to reduce the damage is going to help. So a couple of rounds of masking tape. Then I'm brushing on the epoxy, so I'm using a semi-thickened epoxy here. As you can see, it's actually brushable. So that is the West System 105-206 epoxy, lightly thickened with a little bit of wood flour and then coloured again with the mahogany dust just to get that same colour as my finished utility, which I do in any circumstance where I'm going to have a bright finished part. And I don't really need this very thick because we've got a really tight fitment on all of these laminations, and I want to be able to brush that in between the individual layers as I lay all this up. So plenty of clips and clamps just help me to get all of that in place. So I did the first side with all 3 of those laminations at the same time because we've got those stepped ends to the laminations. And then the second side, I've done this 1 layer at a time because I needed to trim in those stepped ends as I go along, really, because doing a dry fit of that probably wouldn't have given me such a good fit on that final joint. Okay, a very messy operation, but I've got all of those laminations in place now, and pleased with how that's all worked. You can't really see any of the glue, but I've managed to stagger those joints top and bottom by a couple of inches each, which is good. So I'm going to let that epoxy set up enough so that none of this is going to move, or so that I can remove most of the clamps, probably just leave these ones in sort of high pressure areas where this is trying to push out. And then I'll be able to clean this up. I'll pull the tapes before the epoxy is fully cured, and I'll clean up all of this squeeze out and mess before it's gone properly hard as well. So let's leave that set up for a bit. So timing is a pretty critical thing with epoxy. If you play it right, then it can make your life a hell of a lot easier. So I've left this now for probably about 4 hours, I think, and it's just starting to set up. It's quite hard in some places actually, and a little bit gummy in others. And that's the perfect time really for me to get this cleaned up, save myself a load of work. So I can take all the clamps off, and I'm going to leave the clamps in the major stress position, which are the kind of outruns of these sharp turns, because it's a little bit gummy. So if I take those off, it could just slowly spring and part away, and it's actually a bit late at night. I probably shouldn't still be at the workshop, but if I go home and go to bed and leave that, I might come back in the morning and find that some of those laminations have parted open, which I do not want to do. So I'll leave the bulk of the clips on, but what I can do is take this tape off now and just clean up the worst of it. So I've not got to contend with fully hardened epoxy. So I can get the tapes pulled. And a quick run around with a carbide scraper means we can just clean up any of the squeeze out we've got going on here. Get the worst of it off before it goes like concrete. Okay, so that's the outer edge cleaned up, and you can see, I don't know if you can tell, but it's still just a little bit gummy, but just about take a thumbprint, but ideal time to clean it up. So I've got that internal corner done, which is going to be the most difficult one. This top's going to get trimmed down, and then the inside's going to be rounded, so I won't bother to clean those up. And obviously, despite my best efforts, the face has got a little bit gummed up, but we'll just sand that again, that's fine. Got more than enough thickness in those veneers to take a bit of sand in to clean the faces back up. So that's one side of our aperture done. Okay, so I'm afraid I've somewhat run out of time on this video to be able to show you the whole process of doing the other side of this and then rounding this off to clean it up. It's quite time consuming, all of this work, and because of the nature of the drying times that you've got with things, there's limits to how much you can progress within a day. Plus I've been doing the Southampton Boat Show for last weekend and this weekend coming, so that's cut down my working week a little bit. That's my excuse, sorry guys. So what I'm going to do with this next is I'm going to use an offset base on the router, cut down the top face of this so it's even all the way around the bulkhead, and then I'm going to use a round over bit to soften all the edges to this aperture. I'll do that on both sides exactly the same way as I did with frame 2, and then we'll have a matching pair. So there's obviously a little bit of work left to do with the frames. This has got to be paired up to the actual frame itself, which is upstairs already built, and then we've got some 3D beveling to do, but that is probably as much as I will cover now in this series for frame building. So we'll revisit the frames probably when we put the legs on them on the frame construction table, once I've got the strong back set up here, and then we'll be looking to get the boat all framed out, and that is going to be a pretty cool day. I'm really looking forward to getting to that stage. So in the next video, I think we'll visit the transom. We'll start looking at building the transom, a curved section transom. So that's going to be a challenging one to do, but an exciting change from the standard flat frames that I've been doing. So there we go. As always, massive thank you to the patrons who are helping me out with additional support with trying to fund this project. And thank you to the sponsors that are also helping me to reduce the cost of materials, which is making all of this a real possibility to actually do. And that's great. And thank you to you guys for watching, because without views, none of this is happening at all. It's just me on my own in a shed doing something. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed that video, and I will catch you in the next one when we'll be doing the transom. Cheers guys.